This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, May 1st, only on Netflix.
Ladies, you'll end up shopping for your guy's deodorant, right? So try Degree's Original Cool Rush. You see, last year, Degree changed the formula, and men were mad. One guy even started a petition. So Degree admitted they messed up and brought the Original Cool Rush scent back. It's clean, crisp, and actually smells like someone you want to cuddle. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So toss one in your cart and find out why it's the best-selling men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder, a true crime show with a military twist. If you're new here, welcome, and if true crime is your genre, then I am your people. Today I am doing things a little differently. I've decided that once a month I want to take a break from deep dives and bring you headline stories, cases that are recently in the news that I will be keeping an eye on for future coverage. But quickly, I just want to say thank you for those of you that left a review last week. I saw that my total reviews took a little bit of a spike up, and it was so nice. If you haven't taken a moment and you forgot to get me a Valentine's Day gift, I forgive you. But now take a second, press 5 stars, and if you feel like it, leave a quick review. And guess what? I love you forever regardless. Also, I hope that you're following me on social media. For those of you on TikTok, you can follow me at Military Margot with a T at the end. There, you can find true crime snippets, but most recently, I've been reviewing products that I absolutely love. On Instagram, I post mostly in the stories, and I've been sharing a lot more about myself since I know that many of you are curious about all things Margot. My handle on Instagram is Military Murder Podcast. And finally, for those of you on YouTube, find me at Mama Margot, again with a T at the end. There, you can find the audio podcast as well as YouTube Shorts, where I am posting a lot of my old TikTok stories. So if you aren't on TikTok, then you should be following me on my YouTube channel. Again, that's M-A-M-A, that's Mama, and then Margot, spelled M-A-R-G-O-T. All right, let's get on to the true crime headlines for this week, hopefully in 30 minutes or less. Now, let's dig in.
Military Murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
This first story is no kidding, just in. The headline reads, Man pleads guilty to 1982 kidnapping and murder of a Seaside Kindergartner. Vomit. If that headline made your stomach turn, same. On January 21st, 1982, 5-year-old Annie Pham said goodbye to her mom as she walked out of her house that morning, never to be seen again. She was walking to Highland Elementary School in Seaside, California, and it was just a short walk. That afternoon, when Annie failed to return home from school, her family went looking for her, only to find out that Annie never showed up to school that day. A search ensued, but it would take 2 full days for Annie to be found. And when she was found, it was devastating. Her body was found on a nearby military installation formerly known as Fort Ord. The crazy thing is that, as reported by Stars and Stripes, authorities would have never found the little girl but for a tip about a possible illegal marijuana grow on Fort Ord. An autopsy revealed the horrific end of Annie's life. She was sexually assaulted and strangled. Despite initial investigations into Annie's disappearance and death, the case went cold, leaving the community in shock and without answers. And I am sure that even though this was the 80s where you could basically just let your kids do whatever, people in the community where Annie went missing were probably now more careful. For decades, Annie's family lived with the guilt, wondering why they let a 5-year-old walk to school alone. For close to 38 years, the case remained unsolved, but the Monterey County DA's Cold Case Task Force never gave up. With advances in DNA evidence, they reopened Annie's case. When they reopened Annie's case, they were able to extract a rootless hair found on Annie's remains. Through the use of forensic genealogy, they linked the hair to a man named Robert Leno. At the time, in 2020, Robert was living in Reno, Nevada, but when they searched his past to see what he was up to in 1982, wouldn't you know it, back then, Robert was a 29-year-old Army soldier stationed at Fort Ord, and he lived a tenth of a mile from Annie's house, and he had a child who attended the same school as Annie. Funny how these things work, right? In 2020, Robert was listed as a suspect in Annie's case, although he maintained his innocence. But wait, when authorities went to speak to him, he was already in jail on a parole violation. Go figure. And guess what else? Robert was a registered sex offender. That's right, Stars and Stripes reported that Robert had a 1998 conviction for crimes against a minor in Vegas. Eventually, there was sufficient probable cause for an arrest, and then in 2022, Robert was already in his 70s. He was arrested and extradited from Reno to California. He initially pled not guilty, but he began to make concessions. Initially, it was like, I don't know what you're talking about. But then it turned into, well, I do remember picking Annie up the day she disappeared. But Robert indicated that he didn't remember killing the little girl, although he admitted during his statement to the police that he could have easily blocked it out of his head to protect himself. He also informed the police that he had a history of sexually assaulting children. Eventually, on February 20th, 2025, just last week, Robert admitted that the jig was up. It was, in fact, him. Robert pled guilty to kidnapping, sexually assaulting, and murdering 5-year-old Annie Pham in 1982. 43 years later, and there was finally justice. Robert's sentencing is scheduled to take place on March 20th, but he is facing 25 years to life plus 31 years. So it's safe to say that Robert will rot in prison. In the end, it was the hard work of the Monterey County DA and investigators who did not give up on little 5-year-old Annie Pham. So a few weeks ago, I was staring at my to-do list. It felt like it was a mile long and I just couldn't get started on it. I kept bouncing between emails, scrolling through social media, and wondering how I was ever going to start research on another episode. At that point, I knew I needed to change something, and that's when I remembered Magic Mind. I've been using Magic Mind for 14 days now, and wow, what a difference. Before Magic Mind, I was running on caffeine and adrenaline alone. I was thinking that stress was just a part of being a single mom and running my own business. But now I'm focused, calm, and actually finishing my work without that frazzled, wired feeling. Magic Mind is a tiny but powerful mental performance shot packed with adaptogens and essential vitamins. It doesn't just hype you up like a pre-workout drink might. It actually helps you think clearly, stay motivated, and feel less stressed throughout the day. Plus, it plays well with coffee, so you can keep your morning brew without the caffeine crash. Magic Mind was created to help people be their most productive selves while enjoying their day, not just grinding through it. After 10 years of development and 106 formulations, Magic Mind nailed it. So if you're like me and you're ready to say goodbye to brain fog and hello to focus, visit magicmind.com/militarymurder. Use my code military20 at checkout for 20% off your one-time purchase, or you can save up to 48% off on a subscription. Trust me, just 2 weeks with Magic Mind and your to-do list will start dwindling down to 0. It's not every day that I bring you a case of a lady killer, but here's another one. The headline: Wife convicted of murdering Army soldier husband at home on military base. As soon as I saw that this was a military spouse that committed a crime on a military installation, I immediately looked up the federal record, and this case had a lot of sealed documents in it. So there might be an entire other element to this case that we may never be aware of, unless you were a part of the prosecution or the defense. But I'll probably talk a little bit more about this later, as there is something in this case that is a little bit different than most cases. So here are some of the details that I obtained by looking at the official detention records in this case. This case involves Margaret and Greg Schaaf. Margaret was a military spouse living with her husband Greg and 2 minor daughters. Her daughters were ages 9 and 1, and the family lived on Fort Riley. I should point out that Margaret's 9-year-old daughter was not Greg's daughter, it was his stepdaughter. So on February 19th, 2024, a year ago, Margaret shot her husband while both of her kids were home. Her 9-year-old daughter, who was born from a previous relationship, immediately called her father, who was living in Nebraska, to report the shooting. The little girl made a video call. I believe she used like Google Meet or something, and she was visibly upset as she was talking to her father. Then she turned the video camera to show her father, her stepfather, who lay bleeding on the bathroom floor. The bio father was extremely concerned for his daughter's safety, and he dialed 911 to report the shooting. By the way, the father, the bio dad, he was the only person to call 911 about this case. But of course, dialing 911 in Nebraska is confusing because Nebraska can only respond to Nebraska cases. But eventually, Nebraska was able to patch over the Fort Riley police. In the meantime, Margaret grabbed her kids and got in the car and left Fort Riley. But then she immediately turned around to return to base. And that's when she was stopped at the front gate. The 2 girls, 9 and 1-year-old, were in the front seat, not even wearing their seatbelts. It was clear that they were ready for bed as they were both in their pajamas. And Margaret was actually intoxicated and above the legal driving limit for alcohol. She was also barefoot. As she sat on the curb after being removed from the vehicle, Margaret not once mentioned that her husband had been shot and might need help. However, once she was taken into custody or formal custody, she simply said, quote, I loved him, and I killed him, end quote. And this case kind of reminds me of the Bree Kuhn case that I covered several months ago. When first responders arrived at the Schaaf house, Greg Schaaf was actually still alive. He was rushed to the Stormont Vale in Topeka, but the next day he died from his injuries. He had been shot in the face near his eye, and the bullet exited the back of his head and was found lodged in the drywall of the apartment. It was evident that he had been shot at a very close range. So while reading the formal records, this is what I learned. The investigation revealed that earlier the day of the shooting at 3:45 p.m., one of Greg's Army coworkers texted him asking to borrow a helmet. Greg wasn't home at the time, but he was captured on surveillance video returning through the base gate at 6:15 p.m. Greg then texted his coworker to let him know it was okay for him to come and grab the helmet. At this point, the investigation revealed that Greg began recording an argument that he was having with his wife. He was making this recording with his cell phone. Greg was heard extremely calm, but his wife was heated. She told him that she hated him and that she hoped he would just die. At 7:09 p.m., the coworker arrived at Greg's house and he texted him to let him know that he was outside. As the coworker was waiting outside in his car, he could hear yelling coming from inside the house. Minutes later, Greg stopped the recording on his cell phone and came outside to see his friend. And when he came outside, it was reported that Greg looked rough. Greg told his coworker to never, ever, ever get married, and then informed him that his wife had just punched him in the face. While Greg was outside chatting with his coworker, Margaret came outside while holding her cell phone, yelling and telling Greg that he was going to get it. Greg told his coworker, hey, listen, you better leave. And the coworker did. Within 12 minutes of the coworker leaving, Greg had been shot in the face. During Margaret's statement to the police, she mentioned that they were having marital issues, including issues concerning infidelity. As reported by Stars and Stripes, Margaret also told authorities that she believed her husband had been watching child abuse sex material online, and she even said that she was concerned for her older daughter. Now, break. I believe that a lot of the sealed documents have to do with this allegation that Margaret made against the victim. So, during the detention hearing, we learned a little bit more about Margaret. She was described as a recluse. She didn't do much for her kids, and at one point she told her husband that when she was about 15 years old, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She also allegedly had ADHD. So during the investigation, Margaret's ex, who also happened to be her oldest daughter's father, indicated that Greg had been trying to get Margaret help and that he was trying to get her into counseling, and he wanted her specifically to seek help for mental issues. The record seems to state that Margaret was on medication, but that when she was pregnant and breastfeeding, she stopped taking her meds. In this case, the judge was not inclined to release Margaret, and she was kept in pretrial confinement pending trial. Opening statements for the trial began on February 5, 2025, which was less than a year after Greg's death. Jurors were dismissed to deliberate after all of the evidence was presented, and they deliberated on Valentine's Day. They came back with one question to the judge, which would later be indicative of the result. And the question was, quote, "Can you please define heat of passion in depth or in simpler terms?" End quote. Well, even though Margaret had been charged with premeditated first-degree murder, the jury's verdict was guilty of second-degree murder. Sentencing is scheduled for later this year. The Schaefs were married in July of 2022. Greg was actually supposed to deploy with his unit to Poland, but was allowed to stay home to care for his wife and daughter because his daughter was born prematurely.
Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns, and April is Financial Literacy Month, an entire month dedicated to taking control of your money. Because honestly, no one really taught me how to manage money growing up. I didn't learn about investing until I was well into adulthood. But what I love about Acorns is that it makes it easy to start saving and investing for your future in just 5 minutes. I know, April is an entire month, but you don't need an entire month to learn. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns recommends a diversified portfolio that matches you and your goals. You can start with just your spare change, and you don't need a lot of time. Setup takes just 5 minutes because I know that your time is precious. And if financial wellness has ever felt out of reach, Acorns makes it simple, giving your money a chance to grow without the overwhelm. Personally, using Acorns gave me the confidence to stop putting it off and just start. And that peace of mind is completely worth it. Sign up now and join over 14 million all-time customers who've already saved and invested over $25 billion with a B dollars with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/militarymama or download the Acorns app to get started today. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/militarymama.
ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track, and ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
Our next headline read, Marine charged in murder of Tshea Bennett now facing 35 child pornography charges. Woof, this is disgusting. The amount of people who view child sex abuse material seems to be climbing. I'm not sure if that's an accurate statement or maybe it's just because we hear about it a lot more now with social media, but it makes me sick and reminds me to hold my babies a little closer every single night. So reality TV is all the rave now, even if we've only heard of like 25% of the reality TV shows out there. There is a lot of reality TV nowadays. Well, 26-year-old Tshea Bennett appeared in season 1 of Hollywood TV's Scrippa Boot Camp. That's right, it's Scrippa versus Stripper. Scrippa Boot Camp, if you're wondering, is a reality TV show that follows a dozen exotic dancers who live together. Anyway, on December 14th, 2024, Tshea was reported missing. Tshea was an escort, so her disappearance was concerning to many who knew her. Sadly, her remains were quickly discovered abandoned in a pond in a neighborhood in Mobile, Alabama. On the same day that Tshea's body was found, the Escambia County Sheriff's Office named a suspect, a 20-year-old Marine by the name of Willie Ellington. Willie was a private first class stationed aboard the NAS Pensacola. Willie was the last one who saw Tshea alive, and she had agreed to meet up with him at the Sweet Dreams Inn in Pensacola. Well, interestingly, Willie's car rental was discovered in the parking lot of the inn. You know what else they found? They found his cell phone in one of the hotel rooms. But missing from that hotel room were the bed sheets. That's never a good sign. One report I read makes it seem like authorities were led to Tshea's body in Alabama through the use of the tracking device on the rental vehicle. Willie was arrested in Alabama while he was on a bus in Opelika. It appeared he was trying to make a run for it because Opelika is 230 miles from where the body was discovered and a similar distance from his duty station in Pensacola. So while the investigation in Tshea's murder was underway, Willie's phone had been left behind at the hotel. And while reviewing Willie's phone, they found some pretty disturbing things. Some pretty disturbing Google searches, to be exact. Of particular interest to a murder investigation were the following 3 Google searches, which occurred before Tshea's murder. 1. What does a body look like, a dead body look like after 2 days? Search number 2. How many prostitute murders go unsolved? And Google search number 3. Does someone scream if they're being strangled? So, yeah, premeditation much? Well, on top of these searches, they discovered something else on this young Marine's phone. Child sex abuse material. Yup, they found approximately 10 videos of girls between the ages of 11 and 16 years of age. In addition to first-degree murder, Willie now faces 35 charges of possession of child sex abuse material. While Willie has currently been charged by the state of Florida with first-degree murder and the child sex abuse charges, he might be facing federal charges in the future due to transferring a deceased body across state lines. This next case looked like it might become a cold case since the murder occurred in May of 2024. But in January of 2025, there was a break in the case that left even me shook. 23-year-old Katia Aguilar was a private first class stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. She was a single mom to a 4-year-old son, and on May 18, 2024, she was discovered deceased in her apartment from 68 stab wounds, and all of these stab wounds were concentrated around her neck. She lived in an apartment on Tiny Town Road, and from people who have personally contacted me, it appeared that Katia had a roommate. In addition to the manner of death, which was stabbing, an autopsy revealed GHB in Katia's system. GHB is also known as the date rape drug because it can be slipped into someone's drink without them knowing. For months, Katia's family begged for answers in her case. They did various media interviews in an attempt to get a lead, but for months, it appeared to go nowhere. But behind the scenes, investigators were working, and on February 7th, 2025, police announced they had arrested not 1, but 2 people in connection to Katia's murder. And here's where the story takes a shocking turn. Katia was married. Now, I don't recall reading that in the initial media reports, as Katia was always referred to in or at various times as a single mom. Well, it turned out that Katia was married, and Katia's husband, 40-year-old Reynaldo Salinas Cruz, was arrested for tampering with evidence in Katia's murder. Meanwhile, a 35-year-old woman named Sofia Rodas was charged with first-degree murder and tampering with evidence in Katia's case. And guess what? By the time the charges came, both suspects were already in custody, but they were in custody on unrelated federal charges, and they were then extradited to Clarksville, Tennessee. But wait, I'm nosy, and I needed to know why these people were in jail, so I looked at the federal documents, and here is what I discovered. Federally, both Sofia and Reynaldo pled guilty to marriage fraud and conspiracy to commit marriage fraud. So what exactly did that mean? Well, I dug deeper, and basically the indictment stated that from September of 2023 until May of 2024, these 2 fools conspired to commit marriage fraud for the purpose of evading immigration laws. And wait for it, it also said that on October 6, 2023, Reynaldo entered into a marriage for purposes of immigration evasion. So here's a little assumption. I'm assuming that that was the date that he and Katia got married. Maybe it was one of those arranged marriages where Katia married this man so that he could get his papers or at minimum avoid being deported. It's possible that the man even paid Katia. That part is just speculation though. But wait, I ran this story on my TikTok and Instagram reels last week, and I had people messaging me up the wazoo and telling me that this case was getting stranger by the minute, and that's when I was informed that Sofia Rodas, the woman arrested for murdering Katia, well, as it turned out, she was previously married to a soldier who happened to die in the fall of 2023, the same time frame for those federal marriage fraud charges. A source reported that Sofia's soldier husband had passed after completing suicide. However, now many non-law enforcement friends of Sofia's husband are wondering if her husband was met with foul play. As of now, no additional charges have been brought against Sofia in her husband's fall 2023 death. This is turning out to be a very twisty case, but I'm glad that at least there will be justice for Katia, hopefully. The state charges against Reynaldo and Sofia should move forward to court in the next several months. But if before then you happen to have more information pertaining to this case, please make sure to contact Detective Huffinga at 931-648-0656.
My name is Lily, and I've had hidradenitis suppurativa, HS, for years. I finally found some relief since taking Cosentyx. Relief means I can show up more.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe hidradenitis suppurativa, HS. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some are fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your dermatologist about Cosentyx.
So good, so good, so good.
Great gifts for dad? We've got them, and they're up to 60% off at Nordstrom Rack stores now.
How did I not know Rack has Adidas?
They've got the best gifts.
Gotta show dad some love.
Snag amazing deals on Father's Day gifts from Cole Haan, Calvin Klein, Vince, and more. Great brands, great prices. That's why you Rack.
Okay, one last headline for you this week. And honestly, what kind of headlines episode would I be running if Fort Cavazos wasn't mentioned at least once? Well, don't worry, I've got you covered. The January 2025 headline read, Army Staff Sergeant acquitted of murder in Killeen Wingstop Shooting. So what happened? This case began in February of 2024 and involved a staff sergeant by the name of Marlon Best. On February 17, 2024, a busy Saturday night, a civilian by the name of Larry Kidd Jr., who was working as a DoorDash driver, arrived at Wingstop to pick up an order. Minutes later, Marlon Best arrived at Wingstop to pick up his own order. He was with his two daughters, ages 2 and 6, and he had parked in a handicapped parking spot where he left the girls in the car with the car running. The idea was only for Marlon Best to go inside, grab his food, and leave. However, things turned out differently. At the time, Marlon Best was dating a woman who happened to be Larry Kidd's ex-wife. Kidd was not a fan of Best, the new man in his ex's life, and there had been beef in the past. Anyway, on this particular night, the two men were in the same Wingstop at the same exact time. Security footage caught the following interaction. When Kidd saw Best walk into the Wingstop, Kidd walked up to Best, bumped him in the shoulder, and Kidd said something to Best. Then Kidd went to walk away, and as he was walking away, Best punched Kidd, causing Kidd to fall. A fight ensued, and the fight was then taken outside. At some point, I'm not sure if it was when they were inside the restaurant or outside, Marlon Best, who had a weapon on his person, Well, that weapon, which happened to be a gun, fell to the ground. As Best attempted to regain his weapon, there was a brief chase, and then Best grabbed the gun, aimed it at Kid, and shot 4 times, hitting Kid twice. People at the scene rendered aid to Kid, and Best didn't attempt to flee. Instead, he grabbed a medical kit from his vehicle and provided it to the people who were aiding Kid. Kid was then transported to the hospital where he died from his injuries. Marlon Best, on the other hand, was taken into custody without incident. Now, just a reminder, Marlon Best was the Army soldier and Kid was a civilian. Now, this entire incident is caught at various different angles from various different cameras, and it's witnessed by several people. So there is no question about it. Best shot and killed Kid. However, Best hired a defense team who, after reviewing the evidence, realized that this was a case of self-defense, or at least that was their argument. Basically, while this incident was caught on video, you had to look at the previous relationship and 10 months worth of threats to take into account how Marlon Best felt when he pulled the trigger. And his defense argued that Marlon Best feared not only for his life, but for the life of his children. You see, Marlon Best was dating Kid's ex-wife, and Kid was not happy about it. There were threats and text messages and previous encounters. Additionally, when asked what Kid told Best when he approached him at the register, Marlon Best said that Kid told him he was going to kill him, meaning that Kid said he was going to kill Best. So moments before the incident, you have Kid threatening Best's life. But you might be wondering, well, didn't Best escalate the situation further by punching Kid as he walked away? The answer is yes, but that was not the self-defense argument. The self-defense argument came when that weapon fell out and then there was a scuffle for the gun. While this case occurred in Killeen off of the installation, jurisdiction was given to the Army to try at a court-martial. That general court-martial took place in early January 2025. Sergeant Best chose a jury consisting of officer and enlisted members, and the final jury pool was made up of 8 military members. At the court-martial, the defense presented evidence that included the victim making verbal threats towards Best. Additionally, on one occasion, the victim showed up at Best's house with 3 other men and was asking for a fight. On another occasion, while Best was in the vehicle with his 2 daughters, the victim tried to hit Best's car. Evidence revealed that Best had actually called the cops on 3 separate occasions on the victim, asking for their assistance, but the police did nothing. All of this, the defense argued, showed that Best, no kidding, feared for his life. The court-martial jury had a tough question ahead of them. Did Sergeant Marlon Best commit murder, or was he rightfully acting in self-defense on that night at Wingstop? Well, the jury deliberated for 3 hours, and then they returned their verdict: not guilty due to self-defense. Sergeant Marlon Best's defense team was ecstatic, and they felt that the right outcome prevailed. They told reporters that the week of the Wingstop incident, Marlon Best was slated to attend training to become an Army recruiter. He is hopeful that he can remain in the Army and that he can basically unpause time and resume training to become an Army recruiter. I should note that reports indicate that emotions ran high during this court-martial, and at one point, additional security was requested because the defense told the judge that one of the victim's family members had threatened one of the witnesses. Thank you so much, True Crime Army, for joining me for this now recurring headlines episode, where I bring you some of the headlines regarding true crime in the military community. I hope that you will continue to send me messages regarding current cases in the news. I love getting these messages from you, although, I hate that people are still committing crimes. But even though I do have a lot of Google alerts set, it really does mean a lot to me when you send me these cases and you want me to cover them on the podcast. So if you're interested in submitting a case, feel free to email me at militarymurderpodcast@gmail.com and make sure you include a link to the story. All right, everyone, join me next week where I will bring you a regular episode of Military Murder. Military Murder is a Mama Margot production. This segment was made possible by all of my listeners. The theme music was created by Ty-Ups. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next time.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.